environmental justice network between the Colectivo Chilpancingo in Tijuana, Mexico, and the Environmental Health Coalition, which is in San Diego, California. So I've worked with this network for 8 years now, and my work is centered around these 4 themes, which are the social movement strategies, so how does this network do their work, the politics of gender knowledge production, the theorization of border environmental justice, as well as community participation in the governance systems at the border. And my talk today is going to be looking specifically at this, what is border environmental justice, and then the piece around community participation in governance. So I argue 3 main things. One of them is that environmental injustice at the border is a result of a combination of the dynamics of a global political economic system and the local specificities of the U.S.-Mexico border region. And then second, that cross-border activists have taken up the opportunities in this context to leverage resources across the border and to also jump scales. And what I mean by jumping scales is that they surpass their local and federal representatives to address transnational actors in order to gain accountability. And then the third one is that as a strategy of this accountability politics, this network between the Colectivo Chilpancingo and the Environmental Health Coalition has used the transnational governance space to reach their goals, though there's still work to be done in making participation just and meaningful for all community members in these institutions. So I'll be talking about all these arguments through this order here. First, I'm going to talk about the story of the Colectivo Environmental Health Coalition Network, talk about my methodology and the questions that came out of it, theory, results, take-home messages, and then end with my future research. So my research is located in the U.S.-Mexico border region, which is considered 100 kilometers north and south of the U.S.-Mexico boundary line. And the network of the Colectivo Environmental Health Coalition Network is in this most western region, which is Tijuana, San Diego. And this border environment has a whole range of issues. One of the key border environmental issues is the environmental impacts of the maquiladora industry. So the maquiladoras are assembly plants in Mexico that take, which can be either foreign or domestically owned, that import raw materials into the country, assemble them, and then export the final products, only paying taxes on the value added to those raw materials. And this industry contributes to drought and climate change, competition over transboundary and international rivers, groundwater depletion, air pollution, and hazardous waste exposure. And so the beginning of my project starts with the story of one of these maquiladoras, which is the Metales y Derivados plant. And so Metales y Derivados was a battery recycling plant that imported batteries from the U.S. into Mexico to produce refined lead for export. And in 1994, the Profepa, which is Mexico's environmental regulatory agency, shut down this plant due to failure of complying with environmental standards. And the owner of this plant, he was a U.S. businessman, his name is Jose Can, just sort of went back across the border and left behind 23,000 metric tons of mixed hazardous waste, including 7,000 tons of uncontained red slag. And you can see here all the empty battery casings and the barrels full of slag just out in the open air. And these toxic materials were transported via wind or water runoff down into the neighboring community, which is the Colonia Chilpancingo, which is home to about 10,000 people, mostly maquiladora workers. And after the abandoning of this plant, there were documented serious health impacts, including higher rates of miscarriages and birth defects, and a documented series of lead poisoning in children as well. So in 1999, the San Diego-based Environmental Health Coalition started door knocking in the Colonia Chilpancingo, as they had heard about the Metales case through other residents there and wanted to get local residents involved in the cleanup. And this was the beginning of a more than 13 or 15-year network trajectory between the Environmental Health Coalition and Chilpancingo residents, who would eventually formalize as the Colectivo Chilpancingo. And this network struggled to get this site remediated for a total of 8 years. And this included a whole variety of strategies, including protests, vigils, letter writing campaigns. This picture here is of protests outside of the New Frontier Trading Company, which was the parent owner of the Metales y Derivados plant. And one of the strategies included using the Transnational Environmental Governance Institution of the Border 2020 program to monitor the policy process and address Mexican government representatives in a forum where there were U.S. counterparts witnessing. And so the Border 2020 program comes from the 1983 La Paz Agreement, which was focused on increasing binational collaboration on sustainability issues in the border. And they're focused on issues of access to water, hazardous waste management, emergency preparedness, a whole range of issues. And they're mostly made up of government representatives from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and also the Mexican Semarnat, which is the Secretariat for Environment and Natural Resources. And so finally in 2004, Mexican and U.S. officials signed an agreement for the remediation of the Metales de Ribado site. This is a picture of the signing of that agreement. And one of the key pieces of this agreement was that it guaranteed that the Chilpancingo residents and members of the network would be actively involved during the cleanup process. So helping make the decisions of how much percentage of the materials were actually going to be taken out and how many were going to be buried and all that decision making. And so after embarking on this collaborative cleanup process, the remediation was finalized in 2007. And this is a picture of that process. And now this site is a series of basketball courts, and one of the city's first air monitoring stations is also on the site. So since the case of Metales Derivados, the Colectivo Environmental Health Coalition Network has continued to do work in this community. Starting in 2007, they worked on a campaign to reduce air pollution in their neighborhoods from semi-truck traffic that was coming from the industrial park. And then in 2012 until now, they've been working on a campaign to stop the channelization of a binational river. So I came into this story after the remediation of Metales Derivados and while the network was working on this air pollution campaign. Because in 2009, I went on a toxic tour of Tijuana through San Diego State as an undergraduate. And during that tour, I met the Colectivo Chilpancingo, who inspired me as they joined issues of social justice and ecological concerns. They were working to fight against air pollution in their neighborhood, and at the same time were working on labor rights for maquiladora workers and also women's rights in their community. And especially as a first-generation Chicana who is bicultural and bilingual, my academic and activist work have been focused on addressing the issues that forced my parents to migrate to the U.S. out of Mexico. And so after the tour, I started to volunteer with the Colectivo and attend some of their meetings. And I proposed to them the idea of doing a community-based research project. And starting in May 2010, I began this project to write the history of the Metales Derivados struggle. And the Colectivo was especially excited to engage in this research project as they knew that the Mexican government was going to write a report about this case in blanco, or a sort of objective report, and they knew that their contributions, their strategies, their stories would be erased from that report. And so my community-based research methodology stems from a theoretical and on-the-ground framework from 3 fields. That's transnational feminism, the study of health social movements, and indigenous feminist science studies. And these fields posit that research-academia partnerships is where research is conducted in strategic alliance with communities, and is also conducted with a goal of supporting justice and self-determination work with rigorous data. And this has been my practice as a researcher through 8 years of participatory and collaborative research with the Colectivo EHC network. I practiced participant observation, attending activist meetings, government meetings, the meetings and events of the Border 2020 program. And I see this as an important methodological approach. If you want to know more about the specifics of how I worked with my community partners or how I teach community-based methods, you can ask me more about it. And so the primary research question that the Colectivo EHC network was interested in pursuing in this project was how the network succeeded in the case of Metales Derivados. So what were the strategies that got them there? And throughout the process of my research and our interviews and our conversations, we collectively crafted questions that highlighted the main contributions of the work, including, as I said before, the politics of gender knowledge production and the importance of contributing a qualitative analysis of community participation in the Border 2020 program. So my questions and arguments are theoretically seated in the fields of borderland studies and environmental justice theory. So in analyzing the relationship between the transnational sphere and environmental justice, Carmen and Agyeman argue that the procedural and distributive patterns of environmental hazards around the world are tied to the power inequalities of a global and economic system. For example, David Pello says that many EJ struggles are simultaneously local and global because transnational environmental offenses require transnational responses. And what this means, where the global and political economic system meets up in terms of the specificities of the U.S.-Mexico border, is that this system creates both the challenges and the opportunities that border environmental justice activists need to contend with. And in borderlands theory, Gloria Anzaldúa posits that borderlands are sites where those that are dwelling there are unable to negotiate the contradictions and the tensions found in the dynamics of culture, class, gender, nation. And so in this section, I'll talk with you all about a brief introduction to environmental justice theory, and then move to delineate the factors that come together to create the context of environmental injustice at the border. That is the contradictory meaning of the local and the global. And so as a basic principle, environmental justice means the right of all people and communities to live, work, and play in a clean and safe environment. Environmental injustice has been theorized to encompass a whole set of layered environmental inequalities, which includes distributive, procedural, and recognition justice. Distributive justice is where the environmental justice movement was born out of, the reaction to unequal distribution of environmental ills and goods based on race and class, such as more landfills and polluting industries and less parks in communities of color and working class communities. Environmental justice also requires the recognition of the ways in which culture